Hi, I'm Wendelin Gray, and I'm going to read more excerpts from my novel, Sohyeon After Midnight. And this will be the last video in my series of 3. And this time I'm going to be reading excerpts from part 3, which returns to the perspective of Sohyeon, his son in the family. And it's mostly contemporary Addison, in a suburb of DC. Of course, Addison is not a real place. So the scene here is Sohyeon is going to see his friend Pete. His father is an expert on mythology, and he is trying, along with a couple of the women from Kabu and Akhenaten, to figure out how to deal with Bill, the Duke of Kabu, who has a black magic background. And they're afraid of how to get rid of the demon in Akhenaten who's ruling it. Part 3, scene 8. 15 minutes later, Sohyeon was standing on Pete's stoop, hitting his doorbell. It was still light out, but Sohyeon could see the partial moon clearly enough, even in the daytime sky, and he wondered again about the inner sea. Maybe Pete's dad, a literature professor at a local university with an expertise in folklore, would have some idea of what it all meant. Still, Sohyeon didn't really want to have to tell anyone about what he had seen or where Murray really was. He just knew he didn't have the information he needed to help anyone at this point, even if he went back to Akhenaten. The door opened, and a tall man with short sandy hair stood there, his blue eyes sparkling brightly when he saw him. "Is Pete home?" Sohyeon asked, his voice cracking a little. "We were supposed to work on calculus for the upcoming test, but you never got back to me." "Pete's out right now, but he should be home soon, in the next half an hour when dinner is ready. Would you like to stay and have some grub with us before you hit the books?" Mr. McIntyre asked, letting Sohyeon in the house. The foyer smelled like garlic potatoes and roast chicken. Mr. McIntyre led Sohyeon into his study. "Actually, I'm glad to have a minute alone with you, Mr. McIntyre." "Oh? Why is that?" They made themselves comfortable in leather chairs in the room, which was lined with bookshelves and held exotic ornaments. Like a stuffed rabbit in the corner and statues from Cambodia, it looked like a cross between a library and a curio shop. "I was wondering, given your area of expertise, what you knew about werewolves and things of that nature." "Ah, so this is a professional call," said Mr. McIntyre, smiling in his friendly way. "Now, I should ask first off if you and my son were planning on hunting werewolves, or if this was just some new video game strategy you were working at." "I don't know. It's just really curiosity, I guess. My sister and I have been playing some of the Elder Scrolls and a few other games, like the new Moon Quest, and we have a dispute about how the original folklore perceives some of the characters, how it differs from the games. Looking at the internet didn't settle the question, but only made me more confused." "You and your sister. Yes, I've heard that the two of you have been having some difficulties lately. Is this related to that somehow?" Looking at him, Sohyeon knew better than to lie completely. "Well, we did get in trouble for playing video games too much, but the one visual novel is about killing a monster that only dies if you hit it in the heart with silver." "Okay, if it's a werewolf, silver's pretty standard. What sort of question did you have?" "Actually, I don't know what kind of animal it is. Maybe it isn't a wolf. It's sort of human-like, but it has some animal features. I just thought the idea that silver could kill it might make it more like a werewolf, but in the game we couldn't get much silver weaponry, so what other alternatives historically could a person fighting such a thing use?" Mr. McIntyre squinted at Sohyeon a moment before answering. "You may need to reconsider your interpretation of the monster, depending on the kind of animal it actually is a hybrid of. You see, wolves have a special connection to silver through ancient moon lore. If it isn't a wolf, then that lore isn't relevant, and your magical weapon might be useless." "Why does it have to be a wolf? Can't silver and the moon be connected without wolves?" Sohyeon asked, realizing Juriya never answered his question about Biram's animal attributes when they were at the paintball field. He made a mental note to press her harder on the issue the next time it came up. "Can silver be dangerous to other sorts of monsters?" "Perhaps. The old legends about silver bullets really came from ideas about sympathetic magic. Since wolves were connected to the moon, and the moon was silver, silver was a precious metal, and the use of silver to kill beasts all seemed like a logical conclusion to come to. Of course, in the modern world, we don't think like this." "By that logic, then, would you suggest any silver object could kill a wolf? If it just had to be silver-colored, why not use steel or some other shiny silver-like metal?" You could consider that possibility. If you're sure a silver weapon is what you need, you could also look at something more modern like titanium arrows, though that tends to look more gold than silver as a coating. Did they make crossbow bolts with titanium heads? Steel would be more common, wouldn't it? I don't know. I am not a hunter, but I think part of the attraction of silver bullets was that the silver was not a commonly used substance for various reasons. You want to consider scarcity in your calculations. Suddenly there was a commotion at the door. Pete had returned and walked into his father's study. "Sohyeon, what are you doing here?" he asked, a look of surprise crossing his face. "We were supposed to study for the math final together, but since you never came up with a time, I thought I'd stop by." "It's almost dinner time, so I invited him to stay," Mr. McIntyre said, getting up to go to the kitchen and check on the food. When he had disappeared down the hall, Pete's look of astonishment turned to anger. "What are you doing here?" he hissed at Sohyeon, throwing his duffel bag down on the floor and coming over to where Sohyeon sat. "I already told you." Pete grabbed the front of Sohyeon's collar and twisted it a little as he pulled him out of the chair and onto his knees on the floor. Sohyeon looked up at him, terrified. "What's gotten into you?" "You know, a lot of people around here have asked the same question about you, haven't they? Your sister is missing now. What have you gotten yourself into, Sohyeon?" Pete leaned down and grabbed Sohyeon's hand, where there were still faint marks from the Ponchos bite. "You asked me about this last month," he said, anger and fear reflected in his eyes as he studied the marks. "I didn't take you seriously back then when you did. It happened when you were sleeping. I should have known that was a bad sign." Pete dropped Sohyeon's hand as Sohyeon stood up, grasping the side of the chair and picking up his backpack off the floor. "What are you really here for? Did you come to pump my father for information about your little problem? You'd better tell me the truth, because I could check with him and find out anything." "I just came to find out a little bit about hunting folklore." "And what are you hunting?" "I don't know. Some animal in a game Marie and I were playing. I haven't been able to figure it out yet. Your father suggested I check out some modern hunting gear. Is that okay, Pete?" "Dinner is served," Mr. McIntyre said, walking back into the room. Seeing his son glaring at Sohyeon, he frowned. "Come on, guys. I know finals and graduation are a stressful time, but what's the trouble?" "Sohyeon won't be staying for dinner this time," Pete said, not tearing his eyes away from Sohyeon, his gaze full of contempt. "Sukjin just texted him that he has to go home for dinner." "Well, that's what I get for not asking first," Sohyeon said, meeting Pete's gaze with as much defiance as he could muster and pulling his jacket close. "We can pick another time to study. Give me a call." "It's a shame you can't stay," Mr. McIntyre said, looking in alarm at the boys. "I have a date with Daria tonight anyway." Mr. McIntyre rolled his eyes at Sohyeon as Sohyeon started toward the foyer. "When am I going to meet this girl anyway, Pete? You hardly ever spend any time at home anymore. I'm not sure your late mother would be too happy to hear that your first girlfriend has monopolized your time like this, and right before you go away for college." "Mom isn't here, so what does it matter?" Pete stormed off into the kitchen before his father could reply. Sohyeon looked back over his shoulder at Mr. McIntyre before he opened the door to leave. Seeing the look of worry as his gaze followed his son, Sohyeon thought again about Sukjin's comment about the strange council video. Could this Daria be part of the larger problem connected to Kabul? "Sukjin has lost her mind," Sohyeon said under his breath, shaking his head. "I'll see myself out, Mr. McIntyre. Don't worry about it, okay? I'll stay for dinner next time." Mr. McIntyre smiled weakly at Sohyeon as he stepped out into the night and pulled the door shut behind him. Standing on the stoop again for a moment, he drew a long, shuddering breath. What had gotten into him? As he took a few steps down the street toward his house, he had an idea that he needed to take a long walk before returning home, and started down the street in the opposite direction. Now, part 3, scene 11, is a few days later, and Sohyeon is the only person at home. His mind racing, Sohyeon opened the front door and let the creepy man in black into the house. In spite of the man's shabby coat, he smelled of spearmint gum and cheap cologne rather than the sweet person Sohyeon mistook him for earlier. "Detective Mazurek, let's go into the kitchen," Sohyeon said, waving him into the next room. "Would you like some coffee?" Detective Mazurek nodded slightly and walked into the kitchen. Before he followed the detective, Sohyeon's eye caught movement at the top of the stairs. Moppin had flown over to the half-wall that was at the top of the stairs, looking down at him with intelligent eyes. Feeling mildly relieved that he wasn't completely alone in the house with the police, Sohyeon strode dutifully into the kitchen and took out 2 clean mugs. He was glad he made extra coffee for his marathon study session now that he had company. "Black is fine," Detective Mazurek said, his voice low but friendly. Sohyeon poured the coffee and handed him the cup before sitting at the table across from him. The 2 men eyed one another warily for a moment. "So what did you stop by to talk to me about?" Sohyeon asked casually. "Are your parents home?" "They stepped out to buy groceries and should be back soon." "Good. I'll also need to speak to your father and your sister later. In the meantime, I'll get down to business. You have a friend named Peter Seamus McIntyre, don't you?" Alarm bells started going off in the back of Sohyeon's mind, but he forced a smile at the detective. "Pete and I have been friends for years, though since we hit high school, we've only had math and science classes together. Would you consider yourself close friends?" "Yeah, we've always been pretty close, though maybe we're drifting apart a little now that we're graduating and he's going off to college soon." Detective Mazurek made a few notes in a small notebook he had flipped open. A small pen appeared out of nowhere in his hand. "You visited Adam's his home last night, didn't you?" "I was there for a short time, but I didn't stay for dinner. Pete had a date or something." "What was the purpose of your visit?" "We're studying for finals, and I thought we could study together for a little bit." "On a Friday night?" "We could more easily have a late-night study session on a Friday than on other nights during the week when we have school." "I see. Was that the only reason for your visit?" Sohyeon paused, knowing the detective's questions were getting into dangerous territory. How could he tell the truth and not raise the man's suspicions? "Pete's father is rather famous around here, and I've always found him fascinating to talk to, even as a kid." "What's so fascinating about him?" Detective Mazurek asked, squinting as he looked up at Sohyeon from his notebook. "He knows a lot of folklore, and we always thought he was a good source for advice on video game strategy." "So you wanted to talk to him about a video game? Which one?" "MoonQuest," Sohyeon said, not knowing as much about the newly released game as he would like to in order to keep up the ruse. "It just came out a few months ago, but Maria and I have also been playing Skyrim, so we have some questions relating to the gameplay for both." "Excuse me, Detective Mazurek, but what is this all about? Are you a gamer?" The detective finished jotting his notes down and looked up at Sohyeon soberly. "Peter McIntyre disappeared last night a few hours after you left. This morning we found the half-eaten body of his girlfriend, Daria Febro, in a DC park, which is in my jurisdiction." Sohyeon looked at Detective Mazurek in astonishment. "Daria's dead? Half-eaten?" "We haven't released the details publicly yet, so keep them to yourself. We're still working on time of death, but they think it happened around midnight." Detective Mazurek studied his reaction a minute before continuing. "Doug McIntyre said you were there inquiring about werewolves last night. Is that true?" Sohyeon suddenly realized what the detective was getting at, but he wasn't willing to play along. "Yeah, it was part of my video game research, but I was mainly just waiting for Pete to get home." "Are you suggesting that Daria was killed by a werewolf?" The detective paled visibly, aware of the absurdity of his accidental suggestion. "Do you know Miss Favreau?" "Only to see her. Pete and I haven't talked much since she started dating her." "Did you like Daria?" "I didn't know Daria," Sohyeon said firmly. "I didn't even know her last name until now. I think she was a recent transfer to Addison High, plus she's only a junior." Detective Mazurek took another sip of coffee before continuing. "I heard through the grapevine that both you and your older sister disappeared briefly yourselves recently. Do you mind telling me where you went?" Sohyeon knew he was in big trouble. There was no way to account for his disappearance, and Daria was completely unable to maintain the ruse of pretending to be Marie under such intense scrutiny. Just then a bird flew into the room and sat down on the table between them, her eyes riveted with great interest on the detective as she started warbling. "What's this?" Detective Mazurek asked, pushing his chair back from the table in alarm. "My pet bird," Sohyeon said. "Mappin got loose again. I'm sorry for the distraction." Mappin took a few steps toward the detective, and he slumped forward in his chair as if hypnotized. Wondering if it wasn't exactly the distraction he needed just in the nick of time, Sohyeon heard a commotion at the front door and remembered that Sukjin should be due back with Tammin and Daria. He needed to get them out of there before the detective snapped out of it and tried to question Daria. Next scene, last scene. Part 3, scene 16, and this is after they start their search parties for Pete McIntyre, who has gone missing for a few days. Getting my time frames a little out of whack here as I'm doing this, since I'm only taking excerpts, but this time it really is a few days. When they got to the pub, the 4 of them went straight back to sit in one of the larger booths, then stared at one another in shock for a moment. What do we do now? Sohyeon asked in a low voice. Did Mr. McIntyre ever answer you, Philip? Why haven't we seen or heard any police? You already asked that. Do you really think any of us knows what happened? Philip said tensely, pulling out his phone and looking over his texts again. Nothing. Maybe we should swing by his place and talk with him in person on the way back to your house. Is he a really tech-savvy guy? Probably not, but with all of this going on, I can't imagine he could have read a simple text message. Sohyeon said. Jangson held out his hand towards Sohyeon, gesturing to the cell phone. Let me call your mother in to come pick us up, and we can drive past there, he said as Sohyeon gave him the phone. Get whatever you want in the meantime, and I'll pay for it. But get it takeout, since we won't be here very long. I don't really feel like eating right now, Tamyon said, gripping her mokgung tightly. Let's order pizza and take it home with us, Sohyeon suggested. There's 7 of us, Jangson said, waiting for the phone to pick up on the other end. Get at least 2. Sohyeon waved the waitress over, and she took their order. By the time he was finished, Jangson had handed the phone back to Sohyeon and turned to Philip. Come home with us tonight until things settle down, he said. Something about all of this feels wrong. My wife is sending my daughter Sukjin over with the car, and she should only be a few minutes. How long will we have to wait for the pizzas, Sohyeon? It should be ready by the time she gets here. 10 or 15 minutes? I got the thin crust. Okay then. What should we do next? Call Detective Mazurek, Jangson asked. Call Vince and tell him that we'll be by later to pick up the car at the paintball park, Sohyeon said. I guess my plan to stop by his house is off after this. You know, I can't figure out why, but I agree with you that something about all this feels wrong. In a big way. I wouldn't call Mazurek, though. Something about him makes my skin crawl. I know I shouldn't feel that way, but I do. Yes, I think we should get home as soon as possible, Jangson said. Get the pizzas, quickly run past Doug's, then go home and stay home. That sounds like the best plan. I'll call Vince when we get there. We need to lock the doors and windows, Tamyon said, looking very tense and distracted. I'm surprised you feel it too, Mr. Choi. Sohyeon was with me the night that it happened. Not here, Tamyon, Sohyeon said softly, looking over at Philip nervously. Detective Mazurek seemed okay, though I can understand why you'd think he was a little off, Philip said, thinking. He didn't look very professional any of the times I saw him. But if Mr. McIntyre didn't call for some reason, we definitely should. Annalisa is missing now, along with Peter McIntyre, and I'm really worried about her. Was she your girlfriend? Jangson asked gently. Not really. We had a few classes together, and we were both volunteer guides for the new student tours. We just hit it off and became friendly. Still, it's freaky to watch someone just vanish into thin air like that, especially in the middle of a murder case in such a scary location. Could she have run into the pipe on her own? Jangson asked. Why would she have done something like that? Philip asked tentatively. I don't know her well enough to say, but maybe. Regardless, she could get hurt in there and we'll need help if she did. It's funny, though, that she didn't call out to us if she was inside and really injured. That suggests something much more sinister has happened to her. They sat in silence until the pizzas came. A few minutes later, Sohyeon got a text message from Sukjin saying she was outside. Grabbing the pizzas, Sohyeon and the others went out to the car, Jangson getting in the front seat with Sukjin, and Tamyon, Philip, and Sohyeon piling in the back. Why is it so dark out already? Sukjin asked, turning down Doug McIntyre's street once everyone got in. The smell of pepperoni and mushroom pizzas filled the car and made Sohyeon's stomach growl. It's only a little after 4. It looks like there's a storm coming, Tamyon said, pointing out the back window toward the steely clouds sweeping across the sky. We shouldn't get the other car tonight. Leave it for later. We need to get in the house and wait it out right now. Is it somehow connected to this murder case? Philip asked in astonishment. I have to admit, everything feels kind of distorted right now. Distorted how? Jangson asked. I don't know. I can't describe it. It's almost like we stepped into another world. We didn't, but something has definitely arrived, Sohyeon said ominously, pulling up the local news on his phone. There's nothing on the news so far about the search parties or anyone calling to report what we found. Doug's house is up ahead, Jangson said. A few minutes later, Sukjin slowed the car as they reached Pete's house. The McIntyre house, now dark and shut up tight, looked deserted. No one waited on the front lawn where the flimsy search party tables were set up, the last few missing person flyers fluttering under a paperweight in the breeze. She stopped the car in the middle of the street. What are you doing, Sukjin? Jangson asked, looking around frantically. No one's here at all, she said, clearly spooked. The whole street looks deserted. Didn't you say there was a big crowd conducting the searches today? Shouldn't one of us go out and take a look around? Sohyeon asked. Maybe Mr. McIntyre got cold and went in to get dinner. Let me go up and knock on the door at least to see if he got Philip's message. An uneasy silence filled the car. Without waiting for a response, Sohyeon handed the hot pizzas off to Philip as he opened the door and jumped out, leaving the car door ajar, and his walking stick behind. Sprinting across the lawn to the front door, he reached out to press the doorbell and noticed the door was slightly ajar. Sohyeon froze. What should he do now? Touching the door lightly, he pushed it open very slowly and stepped into the foyer. The house was dark, and it stunk of wet animal. Feeling for the light switch, Sohyeon flipped it on and nearly fell back onto the stoop as he recoiled from the sight. The foyer walls had been slashed, perhaps with a long knife or claws, and on one wall something had scrawled words in blood. Only the letters looked so alien that Sohyeon was sure it was written in another language, the language either of Kabu or Akamasin. Seeing a small black rectangle on the floor near the threshold between the foyer and Doug McIntyre's study, Sohyeon slowly walked over to it, staring at it in fascination. Leaning over it, he touched the smartphone screen and saw the notification for unread messages on it. He never got Philip's messages, Sohyeon thought in despair. They had first tried to text Doug McIntyre at least an hour ago. Had the house been like this for that long? What had happened to the other search parties when they returned? If they had returned. Sohyeon felt like he should search the house to see if Doug McIntyre was just missing, or if he was dead, but something wouldn't let him move. He felt overcome with such a sense of terror that it didn't matter which it was. He just wanted to get out of there. Leaving the foyer lights on behind him, he stepped out into the much too dark afternoon and ran back to the car, jumping into the open door and slamming it behind him. His hand shook as he locked it. "Lock the doors, all of you, and let's get home." "What did you find?" Jangson asked. "Why did you leave the lights on?" "He's gone. Something happened in there. He never got Philip's messages, and we need to get out of here before whatever got him returns. Sukjin, take us home. Now!" Sukjin didn't need to be asked again. She immediately shifted gears and hit the gas pedal, turning down the street that would take them back to the Choi's house. "Is he dead?" Jangson asked, clearly in shock. "I don't know, but the place was ripped up, and there was something scrawled in blood on the wall. I couldn't read it, but I'm sure Tanmin or Juria could." "Really?" Sukjin asked. "Then they're here?" "Shut up and drive," Sohyeon growled, looking behind them to see if anyone was on the road. The streetlights were now coming on, but the neighborhood showed almost no signs of life. Only a few windows here and there in some of the houses were lit. Many were dark. Too dark for Sohyeon's liking. Okay, that ends my reading for today. Three videos. And that's only taking us to about halfway through the book, so it alternates between the alternate world and the contemporary world, and we get more into this mystery of Pete's disappearance, as well as the war between Akamasin and Kabu. So be sure to check it out. Thank you.